A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Hey, back talking fathers with Family Voice. We've been working through some series of late, and one on fathers that lead. And today, the dad factor, you might call it, and the influence on our children on how we think about work. Andrew McColl, the Family Voice Australia State Director for Queensland, back with us. Hey, Andrew, welcome back.
Thank you, Neil. Good to be with you, and good morning to all our listeners.
Okay, well, where do we want to start here? Because we're talking about fathers, we're talking about work, a work ethic, you might say. And, you know, oftentimes our Australian work ethic, shaped by even our biblical traditions here in Australia, but it looks different depending on your upbringing. Where do you want to start here?
Well, I thought I'd start, Neil, with a quote from Rousas Rashiduni. In 1983, he published a book called Salvation and Godly Rule, where he wrote that, and I quote, "Outside the biblical tradition, that is the Christian and the Jewish world, work has been something despised, done only out of necessity and regarded as the province of slaves. In many cultures, mental work has been the duty of underlings and slaves. In the modern world, examples of the same contempt for work are many," unquote. So what we know from the Bible, Neil, is that God works. And the Bible records in Genesis chapter 1, verse 31, after the days of creation, God concluded that what he had made was very good. And Paul indicated in Colossians chapter 1, verse 29, that God's power works mightily within me.
Hey, let's talk about the wisdom that you glean when you are a Christian believer and you have a biblical worldview. And I guess we're not just talking about a few proof texts here as to sort of try and make some sort of argument, but take us right into this. You mentioned Genesis. Take us right back to Adam and Eve.
Sure. Well, what we know from Genesis is that Adam and Eve worked, and their work commenced before the fall. They were engaged in many activities in the garden. And we have reason to believe that Adam was a timber worker and a builder, an orchardist, and a vegetable grower. He had botanical and horticultural tasks, along with work in animal classification and animal husbandry. And Rushduni also, he's a bit of a favourite of mine, Neil, in his book Law and Liberty wrote, and I quote, "Eve was not created simultaneously with Adam, but only after a considerable lapse of time, during which he had been active in his classification of nature and his responsibility for Eden. Adam's marriage was not to be merely in fulfilment of biological law, but in terms of God's calling. Only as Adam found himself as a man in his vocation, in his responsibility, and in his understanding was he then given Eve as his wife," unquote. So we see that also in Scripture, Neil, that Gideon, Elisha, James, John, and Matthew had this in common, whether it's Old Testament or New Testament. God called them while they were working. The Gospels make it clear that Jesus was a worker. This is particularly stressed in Mark's Gospel, which frequently uses the word immediately to describe his activities and the rapid way in which he went about his work and ministry. Clearly, his time was limited and he had much to do. He also said that we must work the works of him who sent me as long as it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. That's from John chapter 9, verse 4. He also said, "My Father is working until now, and I myself am working," in John chapter 5, verse 17. And isn't it interesting, Neil, that Jesus chose to enter Jerusalem on a donkey, not on a horse? Horses for the Israelites could be a means of making aggressive war, but the donkey was a work animal. And we can derive from this that successful dominion, which is always God's intent for his people, means there'll be much work for the saints. Paul encouraged the Corinthians that they should be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your toil is not in vain in the Lord. That's from 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 58. And it was Rushduni who pointed out in his book, The Institutes of Biblical Law, that in Greco-Roman culture, work was for slaves, not for free people. St. Paul in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 10, explained that if any will not work, let him not eat. So instead of being punishment, work was for Christians the means of reclaiming this fallen world for God.
Okay, we're talking work, and for a lot of people, our attitude's shaped by, some even think of it as that alternative four-letter word, work, W-O-R-K, and, and it sometimes can be confronting, can't it, to recognise that God has a plan for us, and work is very much a part of that. He's made us to work, and something of the fulfilment of our life comes from that, and somehow or other we're passing on values to our family. So take us where we can go with the Christian home here. This is a strength of yours at Family Voice Australia. We like talking about families. We like talking about what happens in the Christian home. Where do you go from here, Andrew?
Well, what we know too, Neil, is that the Christian home is to be a place where the family can work and rest, a place of industry, productivity and entrepreneurial activity, where some of its members return after a day's work for an evening meal, companionship and rest before tomorrow's labour. Parents ought to be diligent workers in their sphere, and all work is to be unto the Lord. They understand that this frequently means on time and on budget. That's important, that's essential. And they are happy to do either physical or intellectual activity, viewing it all as an aspect of their holy calling. The scripture tells us that wealth obtained by fraud dwindles, but the one who gathers by labour increases it, in Proverbs chapter 13, verse 11. And it was the writer Bell who wrote that for the Protestant reformers, all work was endowed with virtue. Luther claimed that a housemaid who does her work is no further away from God than a priest in his pulpit. And for people like Zwingli and Calvin, who were reformers from the 1600s or 1500s, work was connected with the joy of creating and with exploring even the wonders of creation. While Calvin, Neil, added that if a man is deprived of his work, he is degraded. So godly parents must encourage their family members to develop a positive view towards work. This can be encouraged through various kinds of domestic activity, including home tasks and home businesses. It was one Puritan, his name was Benjamin Wadsworth, who advised parents in his time concerning their children that if you're careful to bring them up diligently in proper business, you take a good method for their comfortable subsistence in the world and for their being serviceable in their generation. You do better for them than if you should bring them up idly and yet leave them great estates. So the Christian's attitude to work is to be in sharp contrast to the sluggards. We hear about him, of course, in Proverbs 24 and chapter 26. And this individual continually excuses his inactivity and his laziness. So that the scripture warns us also, Neil, that he also who is slack in his work is brother to him who destroys, in Proverbs 18 verse 9. So the Christian is to be willing and enthusiastic not grumbling or complaining about his work or his lot in life, which regrettably was the attitude of the godless Israelites in the wilderness. Gary North's comments here are helpful when he wrote that more than any other specified cause of poverty, the Bible singles out morally dissipated living, whose chief occupational manifestation is slack hands.
Slack hands. It reminds me, and I don't know the scripture reference, but, a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest brings destruction swiftly on a man.
Yes.
We're talking dads, fathers, and modelling a work ethic for their children. Something we all need to be taking note of. But we're talking dads. What about mums in the mix here? Is there a biblical foundation around women and their attitude to work? Obviously, you might think of men modelling for their sons, women modelling for their daughters, together modelling both. But where do we go with women?
Well, we certainly go a lot of places with women when it comes to work. And we would all know, of course, that Proverbs 31 verses 10 to 31 describes the activity of an excellent wife. And clearly, she is one very busy lady. Paul encouraged older women in the church in their teaching responsibilities to encourage the young women to love their husbands, to love their children, to be sensible, pure workers at home in Titus chapter 2, verses 4 and 5. Now, women too should understand the importance of work for godly men. And it was Rushdoony who wrote that a woman can make no greater mistake than to assume she can take priority in her husband's life over his work. He will love her with a personal warmth and tenderness as no other person. But a man's life is his work, not his wife. The tragedy of an apostate age is that women see clearly the futility or emptiness of much of man's work, but they fail to see that a godly man's answer to a sick world is more work. So the Christian worker, this is husband or wife, seeks to build on what has been given to him by A, careful decision-making, B, making long-term plans, and C, utilising his time, talents and resources wisely. He's a thinker and a planner, realising that his time on this planet is limited and that he wants to give a good account to his Lord and Master for time well spent. So the Christian knows he will receive a measure of his Master's inheritance. And rather than being dissolute like the prodigal son with his father's inheritance, he seeks to build on what he has received. For he wants to leave a good inheritance for those who follow him. Because as Proverbs chapter 13 verse 22 explains, a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, while Psalm 112 verse 2 promises that his descendants, this is of the godly man, his descendants will be mighty on earth. So, Neil, his long-term planning includes consideration of his posterity.
It's very interesting, isn't it? And there's lots of dimensions in here. This could be a conversation about marriage, couldn't it? It could be a conversation about lifelong commitment one to another, a man and a wife working together for their children. When you start to talk about those dimensions of prosperity, well, this is one of the things, isn't it, that Christian society has done, even for a nation like Australia. We've been able to harness the sexuality, man and woman, bring those together in a lifelong commitment to their children and build not only prosperity for a family, but prosperity for a nation. So we've seen that, and we might even be able to identify some places that's being unravelled. Hey, men and their role modelling of work, how do we wrap a few loose ends together here?
Well, no, it's a great subject to enjoy, and you've just begun to sort of probe some of those issues just in that little space there. But what we can conclude and what we know is in the first century before Christ, a Jewish sage by the name of Shemaiah said simply, "Love work," and witnesses to the works of Jesus commented that he has done all things well. He makes even the deaf to hear and the mute to speak, in Mark's Gospel, chapter 7, verse 37. In his high priestly prayer, Jesus told our Father that, "I glorified you on the earth, having accomplished the work which you have given me to do," in John chapter 17, verse 4. So we see, Neil, that the work of believers should reflect that of our Master, both in quality and quantity, so that the believer is considered to be, as 2 Timothy 2 verse 15 says, a workman who does not need to be ashamed. When we face Jesus Christ at the end of our time, will he say of our work, "Well done, good and faithful slave"?
Or servant, as some people like to say. It's interesting, isn't it, when you get a different translation in there, but slave to the Lord. Those sorts of things are important to understand too. Hey, great insight, Andrew, around our work ethic. And, you might look around you and you might even observe some of the businesses that you employ or tradespeople that do some work for you. It does appear to me, a little anecdotally, no doubt, around the fact that there are a lot of people right now who are adjusting their work ethic and somehow or other don't like the concept of, a fair day's work for a fair day's pay. And that might be something that, is being shaped by some political policy too, as we look at issues like that. But you know what? Just adjusting the way we think about work, loving work isn't something that comes naturally, depending on the sort of work you're talking about. And no doubt you'd be an advocate too of finding the work you love and putting your hand to the plough and working very hard to do that very, very diligently. But for listeners connecting with Family Voice Australia, let me encourage you, visit the website, even drop a note to Andrew McColl. No doubt he'd love to hear from you too. Andrew McColl is Family Voice Australia State Director for Queensland. familyvoice.org.au. familyvoice.org.au, and Andrew's been an advocate for family for a long time, written a whole bunch of books about family too. Check those out when you can. Andrew McColl, connect with him at familyvoice.org.au. Andrew, thanks so much for another great update today on 2020.
Always a pleasure, Neil. Thank you so much.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.